Hey there, science fans! Have you ever wondered why you have your mom's eyes or your dad's hair? The answer lies in a fascinating field called genetics. It's like a set of instructions hidden inside every cell of your body, telling it how to grow and what characteristics to have. Genetics is the study of heredity. Heredity is how traits are passed down from parents to their offspring. Think of it like passing a baton in a relay race. Your parents give you a set of instructions, like a runner passing the baton. These instructions determine your traits, which are your unique characteristics. Everything about you, from the color of your hair to your height, is influenced by genetics. It's a pretty amazing field of science, and today we're going on an adventure to unlock its secrets. Imagine a giant library filled with blueprints. Instead of buildings, these blueprints contain instructions for building you. That's what DNA is like, the instruction manual for life itself. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, but you can just call it DNA, it's much easier. DNA is found inside almost every cell in your body. It looks like a long, twisted ladder called a double helix. This ladder is made up of special chemicals called bases. There are 4 different bases: adenine, A, thymine, T, guanine, G, and cytosine, C. These bases pair up in a specific way. A always pairs with T, and C always pairs with G. It's like a secret code that determines your traits. The order of these bases is what makes you unique. Think of it like the letters in the alphabet. Their order determines the words they spell. Now let's talk about genes. Genes are fascinating because they are the fundamental units of heredity. They carry the instructions that determine everything about how an organism develops, functions, and looks. From the color of your eyes to the way your body metabolizes food, genes play a crucial role in shaping who you are. Genes are like small sections of DNA that code for specific traits. Imagine your DNA as a massive library filled with books. Each book contains chapters, and within those chapters are the sentences that make up the story. In this analogy, genes are like the sentences that provide specific instructions for building and maintaining your body. Think of them as individual recipes in your DNA cookbook. Just as a cookbook contains recipes for different dishes, your DNA contains genes that provide the instructions for making various proteins. These proteins are essential for countless bodily functions, from building tissues to regulating chemical reactions. Each gene contains instructions for building a particular protein. Proteins are the workhorses of the cell, performing a wide range of tasks. Some proteins provide structural support, while others act as enzymes to speed up chemical reactions. There are also proteins that play roles in signaling immune responses and transporting molecules. Proteins are the building blocks of your body, responsible for everything from the color of your eyes to fighting off infections. They are involved in muscle contraction, transporting oxygen in the blood, and even in the replication of DNA itself. Without proteins, life as we know it would not be possible. But where do these genes live? Genes are housed within the nucleus of each cell, organized into larger structures. This organization is crucial for ensuring that the genetic information is accurately copied and distributed during cell division. Well, they're organized into structures called chromosomes. Chromosomes are long, thread-like structures made of DNA and proteins. They ensure that DNA is accurately replicated and distributed in the process of cell division. Each chromosome contains many genes, and humans have a specific number of chromosomes that carry all the genetic information needed for life. You can think of chromosomes like chapters in the big instruction manual of DNA. Just as a book is divided into chapters to organize the content, chromosomes help organize the genetic material. This organization makes it easier for cells to access the information they need to function properly. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes for a total of 46. Each pair consists of 1 chromosome from the mother and 1 from the father. This pairing is essential for sexual reproduction, ensuring that offspring inherit a mix of genetic material from both parents. You inherit one set of 23 chromosomes from your mother and another set of 23 from your father. This combination of genetic material is what makes each individual unique. It also explains why you might have your mother's eyes but your father's hair color. That's why you share traits with both parents. These shared traits can include physical characteristics like height and eye color, as well as other attributes like susceptibility to certain diseases or even personality traits. Each pair of chromosomes carries genes for similar traits. For example, one chromosome in the pair might carry a gene for a specific trait, while the other chromosome carries a different version of that gene. These different versions are called alleles, and they can result in variations in the trait. For example, you might inherit a gene for brown hair from your mother and a gene for blonde hair from your father. The combination of these genes will determine your hair color. Sometimes one gene can be more dominant than the other, influencing the final outcome. But which hair color will you end up with? The answer lies in the interaction between dominant and recessive genes. Dominant genes tend to mask the effects of recessive genes, so if you inherit a dominant gene for brown hair, you are more likely to have brown hair. That's where dominant and recessive traits come into play. Dominant traits are those that are expressed even if only one copy of the gene is present. Recessive traits, on the other hand, require 2 copies of the gene to be expressed. This interplay between dominant and recessive genes is what creates the diversity of traits seen in the human population. Section 4. Passing the baton. How traits travel through generations. Remember the relay race analogy? Just like in a relay race, where the baton is passed from one runner to the next, genetic traits are passed from one generation to the next. This process is fundamental to the continuity of life and the diversity we see in the world around us. Let's dive a little deeper into how traits are passed from parents to offspring. Imagine a family gathering where everyone is looking at old photo albums. You might notice that certain features, like a grandmother's curly hair or a grandfather's blue eyes, appear in the younger generations. This is a visual representation of how traits travel through generations. When parents have a child, they each contribute 1 chromosome from each of their 23 pairs to their child's genetic makeup. This means that the child receives a mix of genetic material from both parents, creating a unique combination of traits. This means that each parent contributes half of their genetic information to their child. It's like each parent has a deck of cards, and they shuffle and deal half of their deck to create a new deck for their child. This new deck is a unique combination of both parents' genetic material. This process of passing down genetic information is a bit like shuffling and dealing cards. Each shuffle and deal results in a different combination, which is why no 2 siblings are exactly alike, even though they come from the same parents. Each parent has a deck of 23 chromosomes, and they each deal 1 card from each pair to their child, creating a new hand of 23 pairs for the child. This new hand is a unique blend of the parent's genetic material, resulting in a one-of-a-kind genetic makeup for the child. This is why siblings can look similar. They share some, but not all, of the same cards from their parents' decks. Each sibling gets a different combination of cards, which is why they can have different traits while still looking related. The specific combination of genes that a child inherits is called their genotype. This genotype is like a blueprint that determines many aspects of the child's physical and even some behavioral traits. This genotype determines their phenotype, which are the physical traits we can observe, like eye color or hair texture. The phenotype is the visible expression of the genetic information carried in the genotype, so the next time someone says you have your mom's eyes, you can tell them it's because you inherited her genes for eye color. This fascinating process of genetic inheritance is what makes each of us unique yet connected to our family lineage. Section 5. Dominant and recessive traits. Who wins the tug-of-war? Now let's talk about those genes for hair color we mentioned earlier. Genes are like tiny instructions inside your body that determine many of your traits, such as hair color, eye color, and even some aspects of your personality. These genes come in pairs, 1 from each parent. But what happens when the genes you inherit from each parent are different? What happens when you inherit different versions of a gene from each parent? This is where the concept of dominant and recessive traits comes into play. Dominant traits are like the leaders of the pack. They tend to overshadow the recessive traits. That's where dominant and recessive traits come into play. Imagine a Punnett Square, a simple diagram that helps predict the probability of inheriting certain traits. It's a handy tool used by geneticists to understand how traits are passed down through generations. You can think of it like a game of tug-of-war between genes. In this game, the dominant gene is like the stronger team, pulling harder and often winning the match. The recessive gene, on the other hand, is like the weaker team, needing more support to win. A dominant trait is like the stronger team in the tug-of-war. It only needs 1 copy of the gene to show up. For example, if you inherit a dominant gene for brown eyes from one parent, it will likely overshadow a recessive gene for blue eyes from the other parent. If you inherit the gene for brown eyes from one parent, even if the other parent gives you a gene for blue eyes, you'll likely have brown eyes. This is because brown eye color is a dominant trait, and it only needs one copy of the gene to be expressed. Brown eye color is a dominant trait. Dominant traits are more likely to be visible in the offspring because they can mask the presence of recessive traits. This is why you often see brown eyes more frequently than blue eyes in a population. A recessive trait, on the other hand, is like the weaker team. It needs two copies of the gene to show up. If you inherit a recessive gene from both parents, then the recessive trait will be expressed. This is why recessive traits are less common. They require both parents to contribute the same recessive gene. If you inherit the gene for blue eyes from both parents, then you'll have blue eyes. Blue eyes are a recessive trait, meaning that both parents must pass on the blue eye gene for it to be visible in their child. So why do some traits seem to skip generations? This happens because recessive genes can hide out in a family line. Even if a parent doesn't show a particular recessive trait, they can still carry the gene and pass it on to their children. Recessive genes can hide out. They can be carried silently through generations, only to reappear when two carriers have a child who inherits the recessive gene from both sides. It's like a hidden treasure waiting to be discovered. Even if you don't show a particular recessive trait, you can still be a carrier and pass that gene on to your children. This is why understanding your family history can be important, as it helps you know what traits you might carry and pass on. It's like having a secret ingredient in your recipe book that you might not use yourself, but you can still share it with others. Just as recipes are passed down through generations, so are genes, carrying the potential for various traits to emerge in future generations.